Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. We're going to talk a little bit about Keithley today. Yes, Keithley, his debut on Monday Night Raw. A very contentious topic amongst wrestling fans on social media and after making his debut Monday night. I know that a lot of people have got a lot of things to say, including Keithley himself. And obviously, I've got my opinion on it all, and I'm going to share it on this stream here. I want to see what your opinion is on Keithley and his debut on Monday Night Raw this past week inside the Thunderdome at the Amway Center in Orlando, Florida. And obviously, he has a match this Sunday as well at Payback against Randy Orton, which we're going to touch on as well. There's so much to discuss when it comes to Keithley and his debut on Monday Night Raw, and I'm glad I saved it a couple of days before making this video, doing this stream, because the thing is, when these things happen on Monday Night Raw or on SmackDown or wherever, there is a tendency to be very reactive to these kind of things. There is a tendency just to have your opinion straight away and give it. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not also the best thing to do, because sometimes a lot can happen after the fact. And that's exactly what's happened here with Keithley. It's not just the debut on Monday Night Raw, it's the backlash of it for the fans' perspective, and it's the backlash of it that Keithley has spoken about on social media yesterday. So there's a lot to discuss here. There is certainly a lot to discuss here. Ditz, how you doing, my man? Ditz is here. He says ahoy, which is, I mean, that's perfect for Ditz, right? It's all boating themed. It's all boating and sea themed. So ahoy back to you, sir. Captain Ditz is joining us here today. So let's talk about Keithley. Now, I, for one, was very, very excited about Keithley's debut on Monday Night Raw this week. Now, it was announced during SummerSlam that Keithley would indeed be debuting on Monday Night Raw. So that made a lot of sense, because coming out of NXT TakeOver on Saturday, NXT TakeOver 30, he lost the NXT Championship to Karrion Kross. Some people were a bit frustrated with that, because he'd only been NXT champion, when was the Great American Bash? July? Something like that. So he'd been champion all of a month, 6 weeks, something like that. But it did explain his short title reign, because you can look at it a certain number of ways. WWE may have wanted him to have as many accolades possible coming into his main roster debut. So you can really build him up when he makes his debut on the main roster. You can say he's a former NXT North American champion. He's a former NXT champion. I'm sure if JBL was there, he'd be doing this. That was JBL's go-to line, is go to their Wikipedia page, scroll down to championships and achievements, and he would just rattle off everything they've possibly done during their career. So that's what they could have done here, and that's what they did do here. You know, former NXT North American champion, former NXT champion, the first ever double champion in NXT history. That all kind of made sense to me. So I didn't have a problem with that, and I didn't have a problem with him dropping the title to Karrion Kross anyway, to be honest. NXT TakeOver, Karrion Kross is getting the monster pushes of monster pushes. I think he is that good. NXT, in my opinion, is just cemented that it's a heel territory. Triple H loves having the heel as the champion. Historically, with a few exceptions, like a Nakamura and Finn Balor, historically, heel champions have always had longer title reigns in NXT, because that's what Triple H likes to book. So that's NXT for you. Whenever you have a babyface champion, especially over the last few years, it doesn't last long. Look at Johnny Gargano, look at Keithley, and if you're a babyface champion, look at Sami Zayn, you're lasting about a month. You're losing it to a heel, and then the heel's having the long reign, and babyfaces can chase the heels. That's NXT's philosophy to booking champions, world champions anyway, in a nutshell. So that all made sense. And plus, I don't know about yourself or whoever's watching this, and if it's live or if it's in on demand after the video goes out, I think everyone in the WWE universe, the fans, social media, wherever, we were all very, very excited, because any interaction that Keithley has had on the main roster during his fledgling WWE career has been money. It has been money. I don't think anyone in their cameos on the main roster has had the success that Keithley has had. Right? You go back to his first big WWE moment, which of course was Survivor Series last year. Yeah, Team Raw versus Team SmackDown versus Team NXT. It comes down to the final three, each from one brand. You've got Roman Reigns from SmackDown, you've got Seth Rollins from Raw, and you've got Keithley from NXT. Now, a lot of people thought, okay, Keithley, he's out of here. He's going to be eliminated. You're going to have the former Shield brethren facing off against each other. That's what's going to happen. That wasn't the case. Keith Lee defeated Seth Rollins. Tick. That's a big moment for Keith Lee. And then you had that sequence he had with Roman Reigns, which was just brilliant. It was just absolutely brilliant. They were in the Allstate Arena in Chicago, Illinois. Roman Reigns goes for the spear. Keith Lee catches him, spirit bomb, absolutely stacks him on his shoulders to what you wouldn't believe. I didn't even know if Roman Reigns was this flexible. He stacks him on his shoulder. Referee gets to 2 and, as JR would say, 9/10ths, or whatever fraction you want to do. Let's make it bigger, 49/50ths. It was that close. It looks like Keith Lee was going to beat Roman Reigns. Keith Lee goes to the middle rope, moonsault, misses. Roman Reigns just about spears the hell out of him. Keith Lee nearly does a moonsault to sell this spear. It was that good. And Roman Reigns get the win. But as soon as that happened, everyone went, right, Keith Lee has arrived. Keith Lee is money. That Roman Reigns moment, everyone went, right, when can he come to the main roster? Because he needs to be here like right now. And we did have to wait a little bit. That's WWE in a nutshell nowadays. Franklin, how you doing, buddy? Franklin's joining us today as well. So that was his first big moment, Keith Lee, on the main roster. Goes back to NXT, does his thing. Becomes NXT North American Champion. Then again, we had the second Keith Lee cameo, Royal Rumble, earlier this year. Gets a huge pop. He was a surprise cameo in the Men's Royal Rumble match. Huge pop. Arguably, in my opinion, probably the second biggest reaction pop of the night. And that was only second to Edge, who returned after 9 years being out of the ring. A miraculous, nobody thought possible return from injury and retirement. Medically forced retirement because he'd had a broken neck. He'd had fusion surgery in his neck. Spinal stenosis. If he ever took another bump, he'd be paralysed. That's the only pop that beat Keith Lee that night. That says a lot about Keith Lee. Okay? That Edge returning, which nobody thought possible, even though it had kind of been on social media for months at that point, but nobody thought possible. That was the second biggest reaction. So everyone, you can tell that, okay, the WWE Universe, they're invested in Keith Lee right now because that was a great reaction for Keith Lee. He then faced off with Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar pays him huge respect because he sold for him. He faced off against Brock Lesnar. It was awesome. And I still think the Brock Lesnar-Keith Lee match will happen at some point. I really do. I think that's a WrestleMania match that will happen. And the great thing about it is it's not a Brock Lesnar versus a Ricochet or a Finn Balor or anything like that. Keith Lee is just as big as Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar has to sell for Keith Lee. I'm sure Keith Lee will take a ton of suplexes, but he can go toe-to-toe with Brock Lesnar. So everyone, including myself, very, very excited when I heard the news. Keith Lee is coming to Monday Night Raw. Franklin says, is the Hacker on Raw? I think the Hacker, unfortunately, is a dropped angle. It's the modern-day GTV. And if you don't know what GTV is, go Google it because it's exactly the same as that. It says, give me Keith Lee versus Brock, and Keith Lee goes over. I hope so. I think that's a match that could be penciled in for WrestleMania next year. It depends, though, what character Keith Lee is doing at the time, whether he's a heel or a babyface, which we'll touch on in a second. So, Monday Night on Raw, we're anticipating the debut of Keith Lee here. Randy Orton's in the ring. He's cutting a promo after attacking Drew McIntyre earlier on in the night. Not one, but 2 punt kicks to the skull, because the punt kick has just been... I mean, we've waited years for a punt kick, and now we're getting them every Monday night. It's a bit crazy. It's so all or nothing with WWE. So Randy Orton's doing his classic heel promo, calling himself the Legend Killer. Said he kicked Drew McIntyre in the skull because he offered him a WWE Championship match out of pity. Calls himself the Legend Killer, the best wrestler in the world. And then Keith Lee interrupts. We get the Keith Lee intro, and I was popping. Man, I'm a fan. Everyone's a fan. I think everyone went, this is great. Keith Lee, oh my God, he's interrupting Randy Orton. The Randy Orton. What a great way, what a great spot to be put in. What a great way to debut. Now, I didn't really notice this the first time because his intro at the start is exactly the same as his old music. So I think everyone thought, oh, it's his old music. Cheers for dropping by, Ditz. Appreciate that, man. If you're a wrestling fan, Ditz is on YouTube as well, so be sure to check him out. Franklin says, I love Raw and SmackDown. It has got certainly better over the last couple of weeks. I agree with that. So, Keith Lee, his new music. At the start, it's the same. It's the same little hook at the start, so I didn't notice it at first. But actually, it's completely new ring music. And I missed it at first because I was so pumped to see Keith Lee. And the intro is exactly the same. So it lulls you into a false sense of security that you get the old Keith Lee. We're not getting the old Keith Lee. We're getting something different here. It's really bad, his new music. It's really bad. It's not good. It's the most generic of generic themes ever. It's like you go into the old SmackDown versus Raw games or whatever they are today, WWE 2K rubbish. It's exactly like that. It's generic theme number one, and it was bad. It was really bad. But we'll circle back to that in a second. He introduces himself, greetings and salutations, because that's the Keithley intro, which I enjoyed. He offers Randy Orton to bask in his glory, challenges Randy Orton to a fight later on in the show to get payback. See what he did there? Payback, yeah, it's the name of the pay-per-view. See? On the nose. Great writing, WWE, right? That's sarcasm, by the way. That's British sarcasm if you don't understand that one. So he wants to get payback for what Randy Orton did to his friend Drew McIntyre. Randy Orton says maybe later on. It does happen later on. But I enjoyed that segment. I thought it was very, very good. It cemented Keithley. It was classic, how do you debut someone? You debut him in the best spot possible against the best person possible. It makes him feel like a main event player. Instantly makes him feel like a big deal, a star. You know that Vince McMahon loves him. It's about time he's on the main roster. I mentioned his moments at Survivor Series and the Royal Rumble. I thought his promo was good, and I was looking forward to Keithley versus Randy Orton. He jumped straight into the main event scene, and I loved that. I absolutely loved that. So I was pumped. Once the adrenaline of Keithley's promo wore off, I then was a bit PO'd about that entrance theme, because that was really starting to aggravate me at that point, and that was the first time I heard it, and when I heard it the second time for his match later on in the show, my word, was I frustrated. But I did think, and this was something I pointed out at the time on Twitter, at 365Wrestle, you can follow us there if you don't already. This was something I noticed at the time, that Keithley's debut on Raw instantly reminded me of Chris Jericho's debut on Monday Night Raw with The Rock. How do you debut a new superstar, a big superstar, a talented superstar at the highest possible point? I'll tell you how you do that. You do what Keithley did, you do what Chris Jericho did, you interrupt the biggest star on the roster possible. And some people will say, well, there's a couple of bigger stars than Randy Orton. No, there isn't. No, there isn't right now. There is no bigger star on Monday Night Raw than Randy Orton right now. He's been the MVP of 2020. He's the biggest heel in the business. Not on Raw, not on SmackDown. In the business, he is the biggest heel. His work in 2020 has been phenomenal. It has been perfection. His moments against the likes of AJ Styles in January. Edge, of course, his feud with Edge. His promos against Edge. Attacking Edge. Turning on Edge. He's kicked Christian in the skull. He's kicked the Big Show in the skull. He's kicked Edge in the skull. He's kicked Ric Flair in the skull. Drew McIntyre. Ric Flair. He is the biggest heel in WWE and professional wrestling right now. And you have Keithley debut by interrupting him and going face-to-face with him. Great. I have no problem with that at all. No problem with that at all. In fact, I thought it was really, really good. And I thought that segment was an excellent segment. I had no problem with that, apart from the music. And we'll go to that in a second. So they have the match later on in the show. Randy Orton, Keithley. I was like, whoa, huge match. On his opening night on the Monday Night Raw roster, Keithley not only interrupts Randy Orton, but he faces Randy Orton in a featured match on Monday Night Raw. That's elevating someone to a top level. That's making sure someone arrives at the top level on Monday Night Raw in WWE. Raw's got a new star. Raw's got a new main event player. Thumbs up so far. So we have the match later on in the evening. Now, the second time around, because this was the second time around of hearing Keithley's music, was even worse. And it's the worst generic theme you can ever imagine. I can't justify it. I genuinely can't justify it of why they would choose to put that in there. Now, there have been reports later on, and we'll touch on this in a second, as to why they've changed the music. But even if they had to, because his theme actually was great in NXT. But even, business is business, money talks, all of that sort of stuff. If they had to change it, okay, fine. But you give them that? They're piping in the crowd noise from WWE 2K18 or whatever. They're piping in the entrance themes now. And the same way. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And my eyes started to roll, my heart started to sink, because then I started to notice things. Mainly, what is Keithley wearing too? Now, in NXT, his attire is traditional wrestling attire. He's got, tights on. You could call them the sort of tights, shorts, a bit like the old Goldberg deal. And that was it. Knee pads, boots, that's Keithley. Right? And I never had a problem with that. I never had a problem. I didn't look at him and go, oh, God, it's just a fat guy. No, I didn't. I looked at him and go, he's 300 pounds. He can fly around the ring like a cruiserweight. This guy's insane. I've never seen anything like it. But they changed that. And immediately on Monday Night Raw, I thought it made me think back to Vito, right? Back in the mid-2000s with WWE on SmackDown, because it looked like, honestly, Keith Lee was wearing a dress. Now, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that wasn't what he was wearing on Saturday when he lost the NXT Championship. He's got this skin-tight singlet-style shirt on, a bit like those Under Armour skin-tight shirts that athletes wear. He's got that on. And he's wearing these baggy shorts that honestly looks like a tennis skirt. It's a bit like Samoa Joe's shorts, but they're even worse. They're even baggier. The shorts on Samoa Joe actually work. But they look like those sort of Samoa Joe style shorts, but they're baggier and they're longer, along with that skin-tight shirt. And as soon as I saw the shirt on Keith Lee, I knew exactly where that came from. Everyone knew where that came from. That is Vince McMahon taking a look at Keith Lee and going, this guy's great, but he's fat. That's what Vince McMahon is thinking. Oh, he's a fat guy. Yeah, he can do a moonsault, but he's a fat guy. Cover that up. Cover his belly up, is what he's thinking. They want to cover his body. And that's ridiculous, but if that's Vince McMahon's prerogative, okay. But as someone who has been fat one or two times in my lifetime, as a fat man, what do you never want to do? Wear something tight. It's the worst thing you can do if you're a little bit podgy around the edges. Okay? Baggy clothing, Vince. That's how it works. Any fat guy could tell you that. Not that Keith Lee is a fat guy, because he could kick the hell out of anyone. Okay? And Vince McMahon has to realise that just because you don't look like a Greek god doesn't mean you don't hit like one. Go watch a UFC fight. Go watch Daniel Cormier. Because I dare you to say to Daniel Cormier's face that he's fat, because he'll kick the hell out of you. And you can imagine if Daniel Cormier comes to WWE and has a match, what are they going to do with him? Put him in a moo-boo. I mean, it was ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So they think that Keith Lee's fat, so they make him wear tight clothing, which is just going to extenuate any issues that Vince McMahon has. So I thought that was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You bring Keith Lee from Monday Night Raw, one of the most promising talents you had in NXT, a talent that you were so excited about arriving on Monday Night Raw. You change his entrance and you have him wear ridiculous ring gear. I mean, what on earth was he wearing? What on earth was he wearing? Now, the match, it didn't go very long, and that was a good thing because we've got the rematch Sunday at Payback. Keith Lee does some power moves. Randy Orton hits a dropping DDT. Orton sets up for an RKO. Then out of nowhere comes Drew McIntyre to attack Randy Orton. And at this point, I thought, why on earth is Drew McIntyre out here? He's been kicked in the skull twice. The punt at this point is dead because you had Shawn Michaels not selling it last week or a couple of weeks ago on Raw because he was there at SummerSlam. He cut a promo. Before that, every time you got a punt kick, you were disappeared. You disappeared. You had gone. The punt kick would kick you into non-existence. It might as well have been a magic trick. You might as well have been David Copperfield with the Statue of Liberty because once he kicked you, you disappeared. Not in this case. Apparently, Drew McIntyre's skull takes about 3 before it does damage. So, I assumed that considering Randy Orton was actually violently attacked by Drew McIntyre at this point, Keith Lee must have lost the match by DQ. Because that's how the rules of pro wrestling work. He must have lost by DQ. Not the case, apparently. Not the case. That was from Keith Lee's mouth himself. That rhymes, but that was from Keith Lee. And he actually put a tweet out about that, which we'll touch on in a second. So the match itself wasn't actually about Keith Lee. He was really an afterthought in there. He wasn't even in the ring afterwards because as Drew McIntyre fights Randy Orton, he gets back in the ring. Keith Lee apparently has the skills of The Undertaker, Bray Wyatt, and Braun Strowman, and Sting, and everyone of that sort because he vanished. He was nowhere to be seen. So the whole match wasn't about Keith Lee. He was an afterthought in that match. He wasn't in the ring with McIntyre celebrating after after Randy Orton had been attacked by Drew McIntyre, and he'd vanished. He was an afterthought, and just what a terrible debut match. What a terrible debut match. He disappeared. And some people, as I mentioned, and I do partially subscribe to this, he was in the ring with Randy Orton. He had a segment with Randy Orton. Great. And I do think that was great. But that match, that booking of that match was bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. And you start adding these things up. Keithley debuts. He changes his music. Well, they change his music. Cross. Bad. Into some generic, horrible music. They change his attire into something that looks like a dress and a skin-tight shirt. Cross. Bad idea. They have him lose his first match by DQ. Cross. Bad idea. Keithley would argue that that wasn't the case, but whatever. Cross. Bad idea. Drew McIntyre comes out, attacks Randy Orton. Keithley vanishes. On his debut, completely vanishes. Cross. Bad idea. What horrible booking. What terrible booking for someone to debut on Raw. And my thought process during this was, why do the match? Why do the match? There was no need to do the match, especially now that we know after the fact they're doing the match at Payback. So why do the match at all? You booked yourself into a corner and got a horrible result out of it. This is a debut of a guy who can be a huge star, and in the opening segment, he felt like a huge star. But in this segment, in his first match on Monday Night Raw, he did not feel like a big star. Because I didn't focus on Keithley in the ring. I focused on the bad music. I focused on his terrible ring gear and the fact that he technically lost and he disappeared. And the response to that, some people have said, well, you're focusing on the negatives. Well, there's a lot of them. There is a lot of them. There is absolutely a lot of them. And it didn't make any sense to me. And I started thinking that Keithley is just another name in a long line of this weird relationship that NXT has with Raw and SmackDown at this point. Vince McMahon has to change things from people in NXT, and the evidence is there. He does it all the time. Aleister Black. What's Aleister Black doing now? We get those reports now, and Vince McMahon doesn't know what to do with Aleister Black. And even the littlest of things. Aleister Black, when he had his entrance in NXT, rose up. When he's on the main roster, he raises up, but there's got to be a creaking noise like he's coming out of a coffin. Because that's a Vince McMahon touch. Vince McMahon fingerprints on that. He has to change things. Ricochet. Ricochet is not the Ricochet he was in NXT. Now, I've been a bit critical of Ricochet, in fairness, because I do think he has a lot that he needs to work on. I think his promos are really not good. And that's not necessarily his complete fault, some of the words that are written for him, but he needs to work on that. But even him, Ricochet had a cool entrance in NXT, flew around the ring, great. North American champion, people thought this guy's going to be muddy, big star on the main roster. What happens when he goes to the main roster? He's put in a tag team with Aleister Black, which made no sense. And when he makes his entrance, you've got to have like a little bullet ricocheting around noise, right? Because he's Ricochet. Clever. You see, on the nose again, great writing. He has to change things. Shayna Basler, she was this kick-ass MMA-style fighter, and the first thing she does when she comes to Monday Night Raw, well, after losing the Royal Rumble, but the first thing she does, she starts biting people in the back of the neck. When has Shayna Basler ever done that in NXT? All of them, they have things changed. They have things changed about them. And it makes me think that this NXT system that they have, it doesn't work. The Performance Center, it doesn't work. The whole point of having NXT and having the Performance Center was that you built these stars. They were ready-made stars. And there was going to be no real transition from going to NXT to Raw or SmackDown, because NXT got them ready for Raw or SmackDown, got the character ready, got the gimmick ready. It was a seamless transition, and you had this conveyor belt of stars coming to Raw and SmackDown. But it doesn't work, because they're not ready, obviously, in Vince McMahon's eyes. If you have to change everything every time they come up. The whole point is that they get over in NXT, they have a great gimmick, and they can just do that on Raw and SmackDown. But it doesn't work, because Vince McMahon changes it every single time, without fail. He has to change something. Vince McMahon obviously doesn't like or doesn't care for what he sees in NXT, because he has to change it. He has to change their entrances, he has to change their look, he has to change their character. And I thought NXT was meant to get stars ready for Raw and SmackDown. But it doesn't. And someone pointed this out to me on Twitter, and I thought it was a great point. Vince McMahon books NXT stars in the same way that he booked WCW stars. And I know Bruce Pritchard and so many people have denied that Vince McMahon didn't book WCW stars well, blah, blah, blah. The evidence is there. The evidence is there, and I don't blame him. I don't blame him for being very territorial about it. WCW tried to put him out of business. They went to war with WWE. But he does the same for NXT stars. NXT superstars are not made in the image of Vince McMahon. They are made by Triple H and the powers that be at the Performance Center and for NXT. So once they come into Vince McMahon's realm of Raw and SmackDown, he has to change them in his eyes. He has to build them down to build them back up. And that's what he does. And it makes you wonder, because who is the biggest star that has come out of the Performance Center since it was opened in 2013? Now, I'm not talking about female stars, because that has been successful. We've seen the Women's Evolution. We've seen Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, Bayley. I'll give you that. But male stars, since the Performance Center was made in 2013, and since NXT was moved to WWE's developmental territory in 2012, who is the biggest star to come out of NXT? And before you say guys like Dean Ambrose or Roman Reigns or Bray Wyatt or Seth Rollins or all of those guys, they were already there. They were already in FCW. They were already under WWE contract before the Performance Center was built, before NXT was a developmental territory. So who is it? Who is the biggest male star that has come out of the Performance Center since it was built? Let me know in the live chat. Let me know in the comments. Because I can only think of two. One, Braun Strowman. He didn't even come through NXT. He never made an appearance on NXT. By the time he was on the main roster, I think he'd had like 3 matches on NXT live events. He never went through the NXT system. So does that really count? I don't know. Who's the other one? Baron Corbin. And that says a lot. The biggest male star you have made through the Performance Center and NXT system since 2013 is Baron Corbin. Now, some people say, what about Kevin Owens? Partially. But he was a big deal coming in to Ring of Honor at the time. Because he came in from Ring of Honor, came in from the indie scenes. He was a big name. And it makes you wonder, does it work? No. No. And I'm a huge fan of NXT. I'm a huge fan of the work they've done, the stories they've told, the superstars they have created, but it doesn't work. The system doesn't work because there is an obvious disconnect between NXT, the Performance Center, and the main roster. Why? Vince McMahon doesn't like stars who get over and are popular without a gimmick or an idea that he did not help create. And that's been the case for the longest time. And I'm probably not saying anything new here, but that is the case. That is exactly the case. And that's what I worry about with Keith Lee, is because, once again, Keith Lee, who was popular on the indies before he went to NXT, but he's a creation, or he evolved. See, pun there, he was part of Evolve, but he evolved in NXT. But Vince McMahon has to change him because it's not a gimmick that he helped make. So he has to change it. Now, later on in the night, we had Drew McIntyre after this match do a backstage interview. Talks about he doesn't need Keith Lee to fight his battles. The Randy Orton once again attacks Drew McIntyre, hits him with another punt, the third of the night. When we then find out later on in the show, Charlie Caruso does a medical update. Says that Drew McIntyre has a possible skull fracture, internal bleeding, could be a career-ending injury. Of course it won't be, but it's going to put him out of action for a while. Now we know Drew McIntyre won't be wrestling on Sunday, but why do I think he's going to show up? He's got a skull fracture, but I would be stunned if he doesn't show up again Sunday. Drew McIntyre, apparently, can do even work with a skull fracture. Now, later on, there's a further update. Charlie Caruso says that Drew McIntyre's been loaded into an ambulance, taken to the dreaded local medical facility. It's not a hospital. It's a local medical facility for further evaluation. And she pans over to Keith Lee, has an interview with him. Keith Lee says he wants to say, hey, bud, don't interfere in my match. But Drew McIntyre is his friend. Drew McIntyre will be okay. He can't say the same for Randy Orton. We get Keith Lee versus Randy Orton this Sunday at Payback. So hopefully we'll get the match, the bigger match, the better match between Keith Lee and Randy Orton at Payback. I'm looking forward to that once again because Keith Lee is a great wrestler. Randy Orton is the hottest guy in the business right now, the biggest heel in the business right now. That match Sunday could be money. Could be absolute money. What I am glad about is that they scripted in there for Keith Lee to say that he was pissed that Drew McIntyre interfered on his debut. That helped. It doesn't help the terrible booking of the match, but it doesn't make Keith Lee look like a total fool. If Keith Lee was just happy to be there, high-fiving people and shaking hands, saying, oh, I had a great debut match. No, it got ruined. Drew McIntyre ruined his big opportunity against Randy Orton in his debut match, in his dress and his skin-tight shirt. So at least Keith Lee, they booked him in, or they scripted for him that he's not going to be looking like a total idiot. But I have a concern for the match on Sunday at Payback that we'll touch on in a second. David says, do a dream match between Sonya Deville and Taya Valkyrie, first time ever. I'm going to do an Impact video later today. Brian says, it's just WCW at this point. We all know what the problem is. If you held up some episodes of Raw over the last few years to those last few Nitros in the dying days of WCW, I know what I think would be the better show. Because the booking is exactly the same. I do agree with you. But again, this is what I was about to say about Keith Lee versus Randy Orton at Payback on Sunday. Keith Lee taking on Randy Orton. I really do worry that WWE has once again painted themselves, or booked themselves rather, into a corner here. Because neither guy should lose. Orton can't lose, right? He lost the WWE title match at SummerSlam. So he really shouldn't lose again. He can't lose 2 matches in a row, because it looks like he's going to have a future WWE title match, so he shouldn't lose to Keith Lee here. But Keith Lee himself, he can't lose. He lost his first match by DQ on Raw. I don't care what he says, it was a DQ finish. So he shouldn't lose in his second match either, because his second match on the main roster, he loses both of them. How does that look for Keith Lee? Neither guy can lose, which makes me think we're going to get a screwy finish. Drew McIntyre's going to show up again. And the match will be great, but they've booked themselves into a corner. They've absolutely booked themselves into a corner again. Now, Keith Lee has made a few comments on this and made a few comments on the uproar, because a lot of people were annoyed, myself included. Why did you have to change the music? Why did you have to change the ring gear? Why did you have him lose by DQ? And Keith Lee made a few comments on this. I've screen grabbed them so we can put them up here. But he says, first of all, music is out of my hands, period. Leave it be. I'll sort it out later. Okay. I appreciate him making that comment. That comment because, as I mentioned, we'll touch on it in a second. Well, let's touch on it now, actually. Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp, have explained the reason as to why the music was changed for Keith Lee. They said that WWE has been attempting to convince wrestlers to ditch any themes composed by the CFOs. Now, the CFOs were the guys for 4 or 5 years that made a lot of WWE's entrance themes, and some really, really good ones. The Undisputed Era, Shinsuke Nakamura, Bobby Roode. If it's a really great theme over the last few years, it was made by the CFOs. Now, the CFOs no longer are affiliated with WWE. Was it last year? I think it was last year that relationship was severed between them. It has been said that the CFOs signed a, quote, terrible deal, end quote, that grants their publishers 50% of any royalty payments, hence the change. Now, Fightful also reported that other wrestlers have turned down the chance to get rid of their CFO themes as they hate the suggested replacements so much. Keith Lee, however, was willing to go with his change. Now, I'm not surprised if they're getting some of the generic crap that Keith Lee got for his theme. I'm not surprised those people turned it down. I ain't surprised at all. Now, it's been reported today by the likes of WrestleTalk and some other people in the know that Keith Lee is going to be debuting another new theme Sunday at Payback, one with lyrics. So maybe let's not be too quick to judge. But I don't. Would they be doing this theme change if people hadn't been in uproar after Monday? Maybe not. So Keith Lee there, he's trying to settle fans down. He's saying it's out of his hands, and it is out of his hands. I think, even though Fightful there are saying that he went with it. If you're told we need to change your theme, it's a business decision, it's a monetary decision, and it's out of Keith Lee's hands. So I sympathise with him there. He says he'll sort it out later. It looks like we're going to be getting a different theme on Sunday at Payback. Fine. We'll go with that. Let's go with that, okay? Anything is better than what was there at this point, so let's go with that, okay? But that wasn't the only thing he discussed about. So he talks about the entrance theme, okay? So let's talk. So he goes with something else. They say, okay, there's a Twitter account at PatsFanPJ says, all right, let's talk about the ring gear then. With that emoji you can see on the screen now. Keith Lee, once again, says, leave it be and have some patience. Take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. I promise. Let me handle that stuff. So there's lots of different ways you can look into this one. Keith Lee perhaps is trying to sway opinion and say, oh, don't worry, we're going to fix it. You've already been put in it, though. That's the only thing I don't get with this one. You already wore it. People have already seen it's terrible. Is Keith Lee, on his debut on the main roster, is he going to go to the powers that be? Is he going to go to Vince McMahon and say, I look like an idiot? No, he's going to try and do the best he can and be a good soldier. Is he going to come out dressed in his usual ring attire on Sunday? I hope so. Do I think he will? I really wish he would, but I just can't see it. I can't see it. But at least, again, he's acknowledging that there is a problem there. He's acknowledging that people aren't happy with how it looks and how this stupid new skirt he's wearing, or the skirt shorts that he's wearing. And he's acknowledging that the shirt that he's wearing doesn't look good. So maybe he is going to try and fix that stuff. So I'll give him credit for that one. But the tweets, they didn't stop there. We had another tweet, which is on the screen now. So at Colt Bordeaux, is that how you would say it? Says, you didn't have to answer and explain why. Can't wait for you to tear it up. Keithley responded to that, saying, of course I don't have to. I don't owe anyone an explanation. It is simply my way of sharing respect to the people who have supported me. I don't want people caught up on small things when what should be acknowledged is on my debut, I mixed it up with Randy Orton. Way bigger deal. Now, this is kind of been the argument of both sides that people have been discussing on social media about Keith Lee's debut, is that we shouldn't be focusing on these aesthetic changes to Keith Lee. We shouldn't be focusing on his entrance music. We shouldn't be focusing on his ring attire. What we should be focusing on is the big picture. The big picture is that Keith Lee was in the ring with Randy Orton. He shared a ring with Randy Orton on his debut on Monday Night Raw. Now, I said earlier on in the stream, I don't disagree with that. The way he debuted reminded me of Chris Jericho's debut, right? You debut him against the hottest person possible, against the best person possible, interrupting a huge star, a huge established star on the main roster. Chris Jericho interrupted The Rock. Keith Lee interrupted Randy Orton. Great, and he had a match with Randy Orton. Fantastic. That's how you should position Keith Lee. And maybe we are focusing a little bit too much on the smaller things and on the negatives, but it all comes together. It all adds up. And I came out of his debut thinking, yeah, it was great. He had the interaction with Randy Orton. He had the match with Randy Orton. But there was a lot there that wasn't good. The ring music made me feel, I was like, I was focusing on that because it took me out of it. I was focused on the ring gear. It took me out of it. The booking of that match took me out of it. And yes, they are small things. And in the grander picture, maybe in 3 years' time, if he's a WWE champion, does it matter? But people are going to be talking about that. And you've got to service the fans. And I know we live in a culture right now where people love to complain, especially in professional wrestling. And people go on social media and they complain about what they don't like. And maybe they do that too much. And it is great. He was in the ring with Randy Orton. He does have a match with Randy Orton Sunday. They've debuted him at the highest possible point in a main event style match, in a main event opponent, on a big pay-per-view Sunday. Great. Matt Riddle hasn't had a pay-per-view match at this point. Awesome. But there was a lot that shouldn't have been changed. And I think that's the most frustrating thing here, is that they changed things that didn't need to be changed. I think that's the thing that frustrates people. Why are you trying to fix something that isn't broken? Right? That's the frustrating thing. So he made one more tweet, and this was the one that I disagreed with. This is the one I disagreed with. So someone responded to that at Chris Peeps, the Peep Show, obviously maybe a fan of Christian. He says, you're one of my favourites, bro, but they did you dirty by making your match end up in a DQ. And Keith Lee responded to this by saying, it was a no contest, calm down, LOL. And I could not disagree with you more. I love Keith Lee. I love the way they debuted him, and I agree, he's in a great spot against Randy Orton. Chris Jericho style debut, great. But that is towing the promotional line. That is towing the WWE line. It was a no contest. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a DQ. That's exactly what it was. It was a DQ. And that's just what it is. How on earth can you have someone come to the ring, start attacking one of the opponents? It wasn't as if Drew McIntyre came to the ring, started attacking Randy Orton and Keith Lee. He attacked Randy Orton. They brawled into the crowd. So for Keith Lee to go, it's a no contest, that is WWE creative writing going, the fans don't get it. The fans, we can say it's a no contest. It's not actually a DQ. You can't change the rules on a dime. Okay, it's a disqualification. That's how the rules work. And I know WWE will try and spin it, it's a no contest, blah, blah, blah. It was a DQ. And Keithley knows it's a DQ. Surely someone would have had the discussion there of saying, why is he losing his first match by DQ? And the response to that is, oh, it's a no contest. BS. That is such a company line, and he knows it. The fans who are watching knows it. Because later on in the night, they might have a DQ finish, where it's exactly the same. You can't have one or the other, okay? It's a DQ. Enforce the rules. Any past referee on social media, or anyone who's been watching WWE or professional wrestling for however long, will say that was a DQ finish. And it was. It was an absolutely DQ finish. So, absolutely BS. Pure BS. Brian says, name me one person who came from NXT to the main roster that Vince has never ruined. Well, maybe ruined is a strong word, but he certainly changes people. That's what I said earlier on in the stream, is that he changes people, for better or for worse, because they're not built in his image. And it was the same when anyone comes from outside WWE, he needs to change him in his image. And I think people were lulled into a false sense of security that they thought because because NXT is under the WWE banner, that we wouldn't have these constant changes to people's characters and people's gimmicks. That's not the case. That is not the case. If you're in NXT, you're not built in Vince McMahon's image, so he has to change you. Which once again proves the NXT system, the WWE Performance Center system, doesn't work. Because it was meant to get people ready-made for Raw and SmackDown, so they didn't have to make changes. Yet they still are. And the WWE Performance Center has been around 7 years at this point. NXT as a developmental territory has been around for 8 years at this point. And they still, to this day, make changes to nearly everyone that comes from NXT and debuts on the main roster. And that's because it wasn't built in Vince McMahon's image. And it's frustrating. They change things that don't need to be changed. That's what happens every single time. Every single time. So, Keithley here. I'm not going to argue with people that say that he's not in a great spot, because he is. He is in an absolute great spot. He shared the ring with Randy Orton. It's a huge deal, and that's great. And I don't think, for what it's worth, he's being buried. I've seen so many people saying, they buried Keithley. They really, really didn't. They really didn't. He was involved with Randy Orton. He's got a match against Randy Orton at Payback. They debuted him against the best person possible, in a main event style spot. He wasn't being buried. People who use the word buried on social media, it's so overused, and I think a lot of people that use it don't understand what that word means. Very few people actually get buried, okay? He's not being buried. What concerns me with the whole Keithley situation here and his debut on Monday Night Raw is that I think Vince McMahon and those creative geniuses genuinely do think in their mind that this is the best and only way of getting Keithley over to be a main event star. And that, to me, that is the most worrying thing. He's not being buried. He really isn't. And in their minds, he isn't being buried. They think that this is the right thing to do. This is the best way to make Keithley look like a star. And it isn't. It's stupid. You're changing a big chunk of what fundamentally made Keithley really popular in NXT. Now, his in-ring style isn't going to change. I hope not. I hope they don't tell him to change his in-ring style. And hopefully his promos won't change. I thought his promo from Raw was pretty good, similar to the promos he did in NXT, so that's good. But in WWE and in professional wrestling, it's not just about the in-ring style. It's about the whole package. It's about your entrance, which has been changed. It's about his ring gear, which have been changed. These aesthetic changes are changes that don't need to be changed. And look at the biggest WWE superstars in history. Their entrances and their looks, that was a big deal. Steve Austin, his entrance was huge. The Undertaker, his entrance was huge. The Rock, Hulk Hogan. Do you think they would have told Hulk Hogan, don't rip the shirt, don't wear the red and yellow? No, because it's important. It's about the whole package. And they do this every single time. Ricochet, Aleister Black, Shayna Basler, Sanity, Shinsuke Nakamura. Is Shinsuke Nakamura the Shinsuke Nakamura that was in NXT? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And they change things until the superstar is almost unrecognizable to what made them so popular in NXT. And then they wonder, right? Why isn't the superstar popular anymore? Oh, they just don't have it. They're just missing something. Maybe they're missing what you took away. That's what they're missing. Aleister Black, Vince McMahon's going, I think he's missing something. I can't quite put my finger on it. I can. It's when you changed him into not being Aleister Black anymore. And then they drop him like a bad habit because they go, I've tried everything. No, you haven't. You've tried too much when you didn't need to try to change anything at all. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen to Keithley, but it's worrying because you look at past events, and it's there to see. And look, there's rumours also as well that Keithley could have a heel turn in the future and a WWE Championship feud with Drew McIntyre, which would be huge for him, massive for him. Can you imagine Keithley jump straight into a WWE Championship picture after Randy Orton's done his feud with Keithley? That's great. And it's very obvious. Keithley, Vince McMahon is a huge fan of Keithley. And historically, whenever Vince McMahon is hands-on in a project of a WWE superstar and he's obsessed with them and he's a big fan, they get great opportunities. Look at Jinder Mahal. He's a WWE champion. Why? Because Vince McMahon just became obsessed with Jinder Mahal. Fandango when he debuted. Look at Fandango now. He's in NXT with Breezango. He beat Chris Jericho at WrestleMania in his debut match. Okay, Chris Jericho didn't want to do that, but you go back and look at the interviews. Chris Jericho says the reason he did it and the reason Fandango got that spot was because Vince McMahon was a huge fan and he was obsessed with him. That's what he wanted to do at the time. So if Vince McMahon's a huge fan of Keith Lee and is obsessed with Keith Lee, and it's evident that is the case because they're making these changes to his character, that's great for Keith Lee. And Keith Lee, in my opinion, is a lot better than Jinder Mahal and Fandango. No slight to them, but Keith Lee has all the properties of being a huge star. And he's going to get great opportunities. He's not being buried. He's not being buried. That argument is ridiculous, that he's being buried, because he's not. And I'm excited to see him do well in WWE. But you look at those names that I just mentioned, Jinder Mahal, Fandango, Vince McMahon has a very short attention span. He gets bored very quickly. And he does these changes to these characters, and they don't work because they don't need to be changed, and he gets bored and they disappear. And then you have the report, Vince McMahon doesn't know what to do with so-and-so. Oh, he's tried everything he can, blah, blah, blah. And I worry about that with Keith Lee. I worry that that's going to be the case with Keith Lee. Let's hope that it doesn't happen with Keith Lee, but I think we're going to see some more changes at Payback on Sunday. As I mentioned, I think the entrance music will change. Let's hope Keith Lee goes back to his old entrance style. Because this isn't a conversation that we need to be having. If Keith Lee debuted on Monday Night Raw as the Keith Lee from NXT, same music, same ring gear, I don't even think we'd be so PO'd about the finish because we go, okay, that can come later on. And they've made this conversation that they didn't need to have. And I think that's the biggest mistake by WWE here. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Keith Lee's debut on Monday Night Raw? What do you think about the changes they made to him, his ring gear, his entrance, his look, the way that he was booked in that debut match, and what do you think is going to happen this Sunday at Payback in his match against Randy Orton? Let me know your thoughts in either the live chat or if you're watching this after we've gone live in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. I really enjoy interacting with you guys on this channel. If you haven't already, if you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or you can go to the channel and subscribe there. We made over 700 subscribers on SummerSlam weekend, so of course we move on to our next target, which is 800 subscribers on that long road to 1,000 subscribers. Once we get to 1,000 subscribers, we can do a lot more fun stuff here on the channel, a lot more live streams, a lot more watch-alongs, just a lot. It opens up a lot of doors once you get to 1,000. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. If you've enjoyed this video, if you've enjoyed this stream, please do smash a like on the like button too. That really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos before. We're also going to be doing a couple of streams over the next few days. We're going to be doing NXT reactions and highlights tonight as soon as NXT goes off of the air. We'll also do AEW Dynamite reactions and highlights as soon as Dynamite goes off of the air on Thursday. We're going to be doing a lot of Payback content this week on the channel too. Predictions, previews, highlights, reactions, all of that fun stuff. So make sure you subscribe to Wrestle News 365 so you don't miss any of that. And thank you very much for watching, listening, or streaming, or however you come across this video or stream today. You can also follow us on our social media platforms. The handles are on the screen right now. The links are in the description box below. It's at 365Wrestle on Twitter and at Wrestle News 365 on Facebook and Instagram. So be sure to give us a like or a follow there if you haven't already. Thanks again for everyone for joining us today, and I'll speak with you again